Chapter 6 The Marquise. France, some days later, the Saint Antoine quarter of Paris, a village near the Marquise's chateau in the country and the Marquise's chateau. He was a man of about 60, handsomely dressed, with a face like a fine mask, a face of glassy paleness, every feature clearly defined, one unchanging expression on it. The nose, though beautifully formed, was slightly pinched on top of each nostril and would occasionally make a movement that gave his face a look of treachery and cruelty. Closer examination showed that the line of the mouth and the lines of the eyes were much too thin, but it was all in all a handsome face and a remarkable one. Its owner went downstairs and into the country yard, got into his carriage and drove away. It was agreeable to him to see the common people run before his horses and often barely escape being run down. His men drove as if he were charging an enemy, and the furious driving brought no check into the face or to the lips of the master. The complaint had sometimes been heard, even in that deaf city and dumb age, that in the narrow streets without footways the fierce custom of hard driving endangered and hurt many in a most barbarous manner, but a few cared enough to think of it a second time, and in this matter, as in all others, the common people were left to get out of their difficulties as best they could. With a wild rattle and clatter and an inhuman lack of consideration not easily understood today, the carriage dashed through the streets of Paris and swept round corners, with women screaming before it and men desperately pulling children out of its way. At last, turning at a street cornered by a fountain, one of its wheels hit something, and the carriage came to a sudden halt. There was a loud cry from a number of voices, and the horses reared into the air and then dropped down again. If it hadn't been for this, the carriage probably wouldn't have stopped. Carriages were often known to drive on and leave their wounded behind, and why not? But the frightened driver had got down in a hurry, and there were 20 hands at the horses' bridles. "What has gone wrong?" said the Marquis calmly, looking out. A tall man in a nightcap had caught up a bundle from under the horse's feet. He had put it down at the foot of the fountain and was down in the mud and wet, hauling over it like a wild animal. "Pardon, monsieur," said a man in rags, humbly. "It's a child." "Why does he make that terrible noise? Is it his child?" "Excuse me, monsieur. It is a pity, yes." The fountain was a little distance from the carriage, for the street widened where it was into a space some 10 or 12 meters square. As the tall man suddenly got up and came running at the carriage, the Marquis quickly put his hands to his sword, ready to draw it. "Killed!" screamed the man in wild desperation, raising both arms above his head and staring at the Marquis. "Dead!" The people closed round and looked at the Marquis. There was nothing in their eyes but watchfulness and eagerness. There was no visible threat or anger. The Marquis ran his eyes over them all as if they were nothing but rats come out of their holes. He took out his purse. "It is extraordinary to me," he said, "that you people cannot take care of yourselves and your children. One or the other of you is forever in the way. How do I know what injury you have done my horses? See? Give him that." He threw out a gold coin for the driver to pick up, and all heads leaned forward so that all their eyes might look down as it fell. The tall man called out again with a most unearthly cry. "Dead!" His cries were interrupted by the sudden arrival of another man. On seeing him, the miserable creature leaned on his shoulder, sobbing and crying and pointing to the fountain where some women were bending over the lifeless bundle. "I know all. I know all, said the newcomer. Be a brave man, my Gaspard. It's better for the poor little thing to die so than to live. You are a philosopher, you there, said the Marquis, smiling. What's your name? They call me Dvarge. Of what trade? Wine cellar. Pick up that, philosopher and wine cellar, said the Marquis, throwing him another gold coin, and spend it as you will. The horses there, are they all right? Without even looking at the crowd a second time, the Marquis leaned back in his seat and was just being driven away with the air of a gentleman who had accidentally broken some common thing and had paid for it and could afford to pay for it, when his ease was disturbed by a coin flying into his carriage and landing on the floor. "Stop," said the Marquis. "Hold the horses. Who threw that?" He looked to the spot where Dvarge the wine cellar had stood, but the poor father was rolling on the ground there, and the figure who stood beside him was the figure of a dark, stout woman knitting. "You dogs," said the Marquis, but smoothly and with an unchanged face. "If I knew which of you threw that at the carriage, he would be crushed under the wheels." The crowd knew from long, hard experience what such a man could do to them. Not a voice or a hand or even an eye was raised. Among the men, not one, but the woman who stood knitting looked up steadily and looked the Marquis in the face, but he gave no sign that he had noticed. His eyes passed over her and all the other rats. He leaned back in his seat again and gave the word, "Go on." Through a beautiful landscape with patches of bright corn and rough vegetables that could be used instead of wheat, the Marquis in his traveling carriage with 4 horses and 2 coachmen struggled up a steep hill. The sun shone so brilliantly into the carriage when it reached the hilltop that its occupant was bathed in deep red. "It will die out," said the Marquis. In fact, the sun was so low that it dipped behind the hill at the moment when the heavy drag had been fitted to the wheel and the carriage slid downhill in a cloud of dust. The red glow departed quickly. The sun and the Marquis going down together. There was no glow when the drag was taken off the wheel, but there remained a broken country, bold and open, a little village at the bottom of the hill, a broad sweep and rise beyond it, a church tower, a windmill, a forest for hunting, and a rocky hill with a fortress on it used as a prison. As the night drew on, the Marquis looked upon all these darkening objects with the air of one who was coming near home. The village had its one poor street, with its poor stable yard for horses and its poor fountain. It had its poor people too. All its people were poor, and many of them were sitting at their doors cutting up onions for supper, while many were at the fountain washing leaves and grass and any small things that could be eaten. Signs of what made them poor weren't lacking. The tax for the state, the tax for the church, the tax for the Lord, local tax and general tax were to be paid here and to be paid there according to solemn notices in the village, until it was a wonder that there was any village left unswollen by tax. The Marquis drew up in his carriage at the posting house gate. It was close to the fountain, and the village people stopped what they were doing to look at him. The Marquis was casting his eye over the humble faces that stood with heads bent in front of him, when an unshaven man who repaired the road joined the group. "Bring that man to me," said the Marquis. The man was brought, cap in hand, and the others closed round to look and listen. "I passed you on the road, monsieur." "It is true. I had the honor of being passed on the road." "What were you staring at?" Monsieur, I looked at the man. He bent down a little and pointed under the carriage. What man? And why look there? Pardon, monsieur, he was swinging by the chain of the drag. Who? Demanded the traveler. Monsieur, the man. May the devil carry away these idiots. What do you call the man? You know all the men of this part of the country. Who was he? Merci, monsieur. He wasn't of this part of the country. Of all the days of my life, I never saw him. Swinging by the chain? With your gracious permission, that was the wonder of it, monsieur. His head hanging over like this. He turned himself sideways to the carriage and leaned back with his face thrown up to the sky and his head hanging down. Then he stood up, picked up his cap and made a bow. What was he like? Monsieur, he was whiter than the miller, all covered in flour. He was covered in dust like a ghost, tall as a ghost. All eyes looked at the Marquis, perhaps to see if he had a ghost on his conscience. You did well indeed, said the Marquis, to see the thief on my carriage and not open that great mouth of yours. Pah! Put him aside, Monsieur Gabelle. Monsieur Gabelle was the postmaster and was the tax officer as well. He had come out to help this examination and was holding the road repairer by his arm in an official manner. Pah, go aside, said Monsieur Gabelle. Arrest this stranger if he comes into the village and wants a room for the night, and be sure that his business is honest, Gabelle. Monsieur, I am honored to obey your orders. Did he run away, that fellow? But the man was already under the carriage with some half-dozen friends, pointing out the chain with his blue cap. Some half-dozen other friends immediately pulled him out and presented him to the Marquis. Did the man run away, idiot, when we stopped to fix the drag? Monsieur, he ran over the hill, head first, just like someone diving into a river. See to it, Gabelle, go on. The burst with which the carriage started out of the village and up the rise beyond was soon slowed by the steepness of the hill. Gradually it reduced to a footpath, swinging like a heavy animal. The sweet scents of a summer night rose all around the dusty, ragged group, tired out from their work, who were at the fountain. The road repairer, with the aid of his blue cap, without which he was nothing, continued to talk about the man until they could stand it no more. Little by little they went away, and lights began to shine in the windows of houses. The shadow of a large high-roofed house and of many overhanging trees came into the view of the Marquis. As his carriage stopped, a light cut through the shadow, and the great door of his chateau was opened to him. Monsieur Charles, whom I am expecting, has he arrived from England? Monsieur, not yet. Up the broad flight of steps the Marquis went, with a servant carrying a flaming light leading the way. The great door closed behind him heavily. The Marquis crossed an old hall with spears, swords, and hunting knives on the walls. There were riding sticks and riding whips, which many a peasant had felt on his back when his lord was angry. Avoiding the larger rooms, which were dark and locked for the night, the Marquis, with his light-bearing servant going in front, went up the staircase to a door. This was thrown open, and he went into his own private rooms, his bedrooms, and two others, in one of which a table was set for two. My nephew, said the Marquis, glancing at the supper preparations. They said he hasn't arrived. He hadn't, but he had been expected with Monsieur. Ah, leave the table as it is. I shall be ready in a quarter of an hour. In a quarter of an hour, the Marquis was ready and sat down alone to eat his meal. His chair was opposite the window. He had taken his soup and was raising his glass to his lips when he put it down. What is that? He said calmly, looking with attention at the window. Monsieur, what? Outside the blinds. Open the blinds. It was done. Well, Monsieur, it's nothing. The trees and the night are all that are there. The servant who spoke had thrown the blinds wide, had looked out into the empty darkness, and stood with that emptiness behind him, waiting for instructions. Good, said the master with his usual calmness. Close them again. That was done too, and the Marquis went on with his supper. He was halfway through when he again stopped with his glass in his hand. Hearing the sound of wheels, it came on quickly and came up to the front of the chateau. Ask who has arrived. It was Monsieur's nephew. He had been some distance behind Monsieur. He had heard at the stage posts that Monsieur was ahead of him. He was to be told, said Monsieur, that supper awaited him then and there, and that he was requested to come to it. In a little while he came. He had been known in England as Charles Darnay. The Marquis received him politely, but they didn't shake hands. You left Paris yesterday, sir, he said to the Marquis as he took his seat at the table. Yesterday, and you? I came direct. From London? Yes. You have been a long time coming, said the Marquis with a smile. On the contrary, I come direct. Pardon me, I don't mean a long time on the journey, but a long time intending the journey. I have been held back by... The nephew stopped a moment in his answer. Business matters. Without doubt, said the polished uncle. While the servant was there, no other words were talking. When coffee had been served and they were alone together, the nephew, looking at the uncle and meeting the eyes of the mask-like face, opened a conversation. Sir, said the nephew, we have done wrong and are reaping the fruits of our wrongs. We have done wrong, repeated the Marquis with an inquiring smile, delicately pointing first to his nephew, then to himself. Our family, even in my father's time, we did a word of wrong, injuring every human creature who came between us and our pleasure, whatever it was. Why need I speak of my father's time when it is equally yours? Can I separate my father's twin brother, joint inheritor and next successor, from himself? Death has done that, said the Marquis, and has left me, answered the nephew, bound to a system that is frightful to me. I am responsible for it, but powerless in it. I am trying to carry out the last request of my dear mother as she lay dying, to obey the last look in her eyes which begged me to right our family's wrongs. But I am tortured by looking for help and power in vain. They were now standing by the fireplace. Look for them from me, my nephew, said the Marquis, touching him on the chest with his finger, and you will forever look for them in vain. I can promise you, better to accept your natural destiny, but you are lost, Monsieur Charles, I see. This property and France are lost to me, said the nephew sadly. I give them up. But are they yours to give up? France maybe, but is the property? It's hardly worth mentioning, but is it yet? I had no intention in the words I used to claim it now if it passed to me from you tomorrow, which I hope and think is not probable, or 20 years from now. You do me too much honor, said the Marquis, but I prefer that idea. I would abandon it and live in a different way in a different place. It's not much to give up. What is it but a wilderness of misery and ruin? Ha, said the Marquise, glancing round the luxurious room. To the eye, it's fair enough here, but seen from a distance, under the sky and by daylight, it's a crumbling tower of waste, mismanagement, debt, oppression, hunger, nakedness, and suffering. Ha, said the Marquis again in a well-satisfied manner. If ever it becomes mine, it shall be put into some hands better qualified to free it slowly, if such a thing is possible, from the weight that drags it down, so that the miserable people who can't leave it and who have long suffered too much may in another generation suffer less. But it's not for me, there is a curse on it and in all this land. And you, said the uncle, forgive my curiosity, how do you under your new philosophy intend to live? I must do what others of my countrymen, even if they are noblemen, may have to do some day work. The thin straight lines of the eyes and the thin straight lips curved with a sarcasm that had the air of the devil. Yes, said the Marquise, so begins the new philosophy. You are tired. Good night. Dead darkness lay on all the landscape. Dead darkness added its own hush to the hushing dust on all the roads. In the village, taxers and taxed were fast asleep, dreaming perhaps of wonderful meals as the starving usually do, and of ease and rest as the slave and the ox may. The fountain in the village flowed unseen and unheard through 3 dark hours. Then the grey water began to be ghostly in the light, and the eyes of the stone faces on the front of the chateau were opened. Lighter and lighter, until at last the sun touched the tops of the still trees and poured its light over the hill. The bridge song was loud and high, and on the window sill of the great bedchamber of the Marquis, one little bird sang its sweetest song with all its strength. Now the sun was fully up, and movement began in the village. Windows opened, doors were unlocked, and people came out shivering, chilled by the new sweet air. Then began the rarely lightened work of the day among the village population. Some to the fountain, some to the fields, men and women here to dig and dig, men and women there to see to the poor animals, and lead the thin cows out to such grass as could be found by the roadside. The chateau awoke later, gradually but surely. Doors and windows were thrown open. Horses in their stables looked round over their shoulders at the light and freshness pouring in at the doorways. Leaves shone brightly and made a rustling sound at the windows. Dogs pulled hard at their chains and stood on their back legs, impatient to be freed. All these everyday incidents belonged to the normal pattern of life and the return of morning. But surely not the ringing of the great bell of the chateau, nor the running up and down the stairs, not the hurried figures on the terrace, nor the coming and going here, there, and everywhere, nor the quick saddling of horses and riding away. The Marquis was still in bed. Driven home into the heart of his dead body was a knife. Round its handle was a scrap of paper on which was written in rough letters, "Drive him fast to the tomb. This from Jack."